from the speakers would be okay to go, so we can then start as soon as possible. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Good to connect with each one of you. I think the reasons we are here, and I'm saying this informally, is very obvious. And at the back of why we're here, there's this concern about what happens next in terms of life and livelihood. So I think in that sense, our conversation today is particularly important. Okay, but for now, we'll just chill, and I just want to I'll get the go ahead in a couple of minutes time, and hopefully that will not take too long. Okay, in fact, I think we're okay. We're all good to go. So in that case, let me just remind you, just before we start, to state the obvious, something that we didn't know a year ago. Please ensure from the speakers, so the panelists, as well as the delegates, including members of the media for now, please ensure that you are definitely on mute. You're okay if we can see you, and that's fine. But I think mute is critical. Certainly from the speakers, Franco, who's assisting me from a technical side, will ensure that when you need to be talking, you will be unmuted so we actually can hear you. Okay, so but please, for now, it's really important that you are on mute. And that's really the only big rule that we need to be talking about. Okay, Franco, just help us. It seems like something's changed here.
Ashraf?
Yeah, I seem to have, I mean, I can hear you now. Something has changed from your dialogue box now, and I can't see the visuals any longer. It's probably the time when you're connected to YouTube. Just the moment that happened, I can see my visuals seem to have gone. I mean, I can click launch meeting again. I'm not too sure whether that's the right approach. Yeah.
I'll check. Just give me one moment.
Okay. There's a moment we went live on YouTube. We lost maybe just check with the others as well. If anybody else has lost the visuals from Zoom.
Ashraf, we're all good. The holding slide went down. Everything is in order. We'll be sharing slides as we go along.
Okay, so at this point, just to confirm, because I just want to make sure we're right, I can't see you since we went to YouTube, okay? I can't see you guys at all. Is that because of a slide? I don't need to re-enter, right? Yeah, but I'm happy to get going. Okay, let's see if we can then connect. As long as you can see me, that's fine. Okay, if you're going to see me, then I'm going to go ahead for now, and we can sort out some of the other issues just now, right? So let me then just say this: a good morning to each and every one of you. I will say Sawubona, and as a collective, Sani Bonani as well, Molo, as well as Molweni as a collective, and certainly Mora to each and every one of you. And that every one of you would be the panelists, to the delegates attending as well. And that includes supporters of the cause, supporters of the fund itself, people who have bought into this important vision of providing relief to the thousands of people impacted by COVID-19 in terms of life and livelihood, and as well a greeting, welcome to members of the media. You have this very important role in asking the questions that the public needs to know, and then you amplify those questions. So in this case, the work of the Solidarity Fund, and certainly in this case, the people who do not know has a right to know, and you play that very, very important role. And when I say welcome, in terms of the event itself, it's an important briefing that you need to be a part of. It's called the Solidarity Fund Interim Impact Report briefing. I'll repeat that, the Solidarity Fund Interim Impact Report briefing. So welcome indeed to each of you. I want to just introduce the panelists very, very quickly, and then we'll get to some of the important conversations. And yes, the media would be asking questions later on, right? Amongst the panelists then, and let's say no batting orders specifically, Gloria Sorobe is the Solidarity Fund chairperson. Gloria, welcome and thank you for joining us. Maybe a good thumbs up would certainly do. Thank you. And then we have Thandi Nzimande, who's the newly appointed CEO, just there for a month, in fact, of the Solidarity Fund. Thandi, thank you for your time. A thumbs up to you. And from you, of course, Jonathan Broomberg is the Health Pillar Executive. Jonathan, thank you for your time. Thumbs up to you as well. Nicola Golumbik, who's, I believe, in London right now, Head of Disbursements and Deployment. Nicola, appreciate your time as well, and thank you. And then finally, Adrian Anthoven, who's the Solidarity Fund Deputy Chairman or Deputy Chairperson in this case. Adrian, appreciate your time and a thumbs up to you. Right. So that's the short welcomes, and the plan is really to keep it very tight. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ashraf Garda. I'm the founder, the chief driver of Champion South Africa. We have a vision to build South Africa into a champion nation. And that is why I think it's particularly important that I'm here, because it is in that context that everything, both South Africans individually and institutions, need to be aligned to what I call a champion DNA, so that we get things right, whether it's proactive or whether it's responding. We need to get all of that right. And in that case, I think in terms of the national cause, starting from government to the Minister of Health, into that very important grouping that has made important decisions around COVID-19, and to all of us, of course. So I think it's an important task that we are part of. I would lovingly borrow that phrase from the Springboks, stronger together, and if there's nothing else, we need to be aligned to that. So a privilege certainly for me to be here as your facilitator, amplifying the work, in this case, of the Solidarity Fund itself. Okay, let's then get straight to where we need to go. So we're going to have the people I've introduced and not too long, some of them a few minutes, some others longer than a few minutes, and then thereafter we would have questions from the media. So thank you for your time. Right, there's also, so the media plan, just so that you know, we would allow you to get your videos on, and then we can talk to you, you can question the CEO firstly, or the relevant person directly. There's also a capacity for you to send text questions too, and there's certainly a capability for you to ask for the rest of the delegates, in fact, people who have vested interest in the workings of the organization, to ask questions and comment via that all-important chat line as well. So before we go to it, let's get this. If yesterday speaking about the Solidarity Fund was important, but if understandably in the last month there was a sense of complacency to say, well, maybe they, that, as we know, has indeed changed. The Minister of Health, Zweli Mkhize, pronouncing yesterday that we are now officially in a second wave, and giving us numbers, talking about 6,700 infections yesterday alone, and talking about that positivity rate ratio around 18%. To put that into perspective, as someone myself who was COVID positive on the 1st of July, when I was, the positivity rate was around 30%. Infections soared to 15,000 a day in that period. It then dropped down to, as we know, as low as 1,000, 1,200 people a day, and the positivity ratio rate, testing ratio rate, dropped to around 8%, where it has stayed for the last 3 months or so. That, as we know, has indeed changed. And therefore, at this point, that I pray not all of us will be COVID infected, but what we cannot deny is that every one of us, myself and you, present, past, and future, will be COVID affected. So we're not all COVID infected, we definitely are COVID affected, and therefore the work of the Solidarity Fund, I think, is particularly important in terms of how they can, in their own way, alleviate some of the problems for the masses of our country who are in some way or the other very, very much COVID affected. So first of the speakers, then Gloria Serovic, who's the Solidarity Fund chairperson. Gloria, thank you for your time, and you will deliver this all important but short welcome address. I'll leave it over to you.
Thank you very much, Ashraf. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to what we would say is our 2020 report. We wish we could say it's the last report, but as Ashraf says, the Solidarity Fund is needed for a little bit more because the COVID is just refusing to go. So let's see this as a 2020 report, and we will talk about going forward, and Eddie will cover that. Let me start off by saying that on behalf of the board of the Solidarity Fund and its team of over 200 volunteers, please accept this report as our humble effort to chronicle the 6 months journey up to end of September and its history from 23rd of March when the Solidarity Fund was established. The main task and focus of the fund was to manage and augment the work of government, and it took urgent and drastic measures to curtail the effects of the local COVID-19 epidemic to protect the people of South Africa. We may have forgotten that the first known case of COVID-19 was reported in the world was on 17 November 2019 in China. Sounds like a long time ago, but it's hardly a year that the first case of COVID was reported. 3 months later, on the 11th of March 2020, WHO declared the COVID-19 outbreak a global pandemic, having observed the devastating effects all over the world, especially in Spain and Italy. Almost no country was spared. By then, South Africa, a week earlier, had experienced its own first known case of COVID-19 on the 5th of March. And 10 days later, on the 15th of March, President declared a national state of disaster in terms of the Disaster Management Act. And then on the 23rd of March, President declared the first lockdown of the country, effective 27th of March 2020. He also, in that announcement, formally announced the establishment of the Solidarity Fund under the chairmanship of myself and Eddie Eindhoven as the deputy chairman. This decisive response of the South African government was nothing short of amazing and applauded by the WHO. As an independently run rapid response vehicle created to respond to the COVID-19 epidemic in South Africa, the Solidarity Fund became that platform where both South Africans from all over the world and also our international friends and relations and donors could express their support to fight the pandemic on our behalf. The response was overwhelming. The generosity of spirit, time, and the financial donations given to the fund allowed the fund to lessen the impact of the pandemic as effectively as possible. Over 3 billion rands in financial contributions from so many people, over 300,000 people, 14,000 individuals, over 2,500 corporates, was the generous response of South Africans and our international allies. We also received an overwhelming response of donations in kind and human resources support. An example of an in-kind donation we received was when, for example, Transnet converted their 2 Pelopepper community health train into testing trains to help provide testing capacity in remote and far-flung towns, accessible only via existing railway trains. This kind of support was priceless, and this was evidence of the greatest leap of faith and hope given to a fund which really had no previous track record. It remained, though, for us as leaders to make sure that the South African public and those who supported us could be assured of the fact that their money would be directed to exactly where it was intended. With that in mind, a strong, independent, and experienced board of directors from business, from government, and civil society had to be appointed to oversee this fund. I am particularly grateful, and I would like to express my greatest gratitude to Sizwe Nxasana, Ayanda Nsaluba, Trifosa Ramano, Michael Katz, Tulani Chefutsa, Khumutsu Makupola, Minister Patel, and Minister Mboweni for agreeing to join the board and help us oversee the function with the greatest support and assistance from Martin Kingston. In terms of our responses, given that COVID-19 did not discriminate rich and poor, urban and rural, townships and suburbs, our tactical response to each of these communities had to be extremely innovative, especially given the lack of infrastructure in some parts of the country. It is fair to say we managed to the best of our abilities to be inclusive in all our solutions. The journey of the Solidarity Fund has been one of common purpose and unity, challenges, humility, pride, and hope. As a team, we constantly pushed each other's boundaries in our quest for excellence. The strong leadership displayed by the interim Chief Executive Officer Nomkhita Nqweni, and now followed by Thandi Nzimande, provided the firm foundation needed to expedite the many facets required within the fund, with integrity, good corporate governance, and exceptional delivery. And thank you to all who gave their best and continue to work tirelessly to protect our country from the dire effects of COVID-19 and to raise her up as a stronger and more unified land. With that, I would really like to hand over to Thandi Nzimande, the CEO, to take us to the detail of the fund. Thank you very much, Ashraf.
Thanks for that. Gloria. And I think it's an important scene setter in terms of where we are, but very importantly, where we need to go. I'm pretty sure, certainly in the light of monies that have come in, monies that have been allocated, and that difference between the two, and very importantly, in terms of the what now factor, in the light of us going to the second wave, I would assume that certainly besides information, definitely media would want to ask some very important questions about that, and we need to talk about it. But that comes up later on, right? Let me then bring in Thandi Nzimande, who's the CEO of the Solidarity Fund. Thandi was appointed about a month ago, so it's an absolutely new position for you, but it doesn't stop you from delivering an all-important keynote address, and also talking about the overall impact, and then that very important issue around the vaccine. So Thandi, over to you.
Thank you, Ashraf. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be with you all here today. Excuse me, frog in my throat straight away. When I joined the Solidarity Fund at the beginning of November, I can't say that I didn't know what to expect, but I was still overwhelmed, and I'm still inspired by the mammoth task that the fund faces. Most organizations of this magnitude get to evolve as they grow over time. With the fund, a pro bono workforce of over 200 colleagues, as Gloria mentioned, over this period worked together to build a 3.1 billion organization within a very short space of time, one that has delivered tangible impact for South Africans. I am incredibly proud to be a part of this team that makes the seemingly impossible happen on a daily basis. To quote our former interim CEO, Nomkhita Nqweni, the fund showcases the art of the possible. And I have certainly seen that and experienced it here. As Gloria already pointed out, one of our primary objectives in managing the fund is to ensure that South Africans, donors, and partners can be confident that the funds were being directed in a responsible, accountable, and effective way. part of that is reporting back extensively and openly on the work that we are doing. We are accountable to South Africa. With that in mind, the publication of the interim impact report documents the fund's story and achievements and the impact that the fund has had in the first 6 months of its existence across the 3 pillars of health, humanitarian relief, and behavioral change. The period in focus today is from the inception of the fund to the end of September 2020. We will be touching also a little bit on the next phase of the fund. But before we take you through to the detail, I would like to address the issue of vaccines and the role that the fund is playing in supporting government's efforts to secure vaccines for the country. As Ashraf said, that's a point of interest for most South Africans. At the fund, we all share the world's excitement, hope, and sense of optimism now that the first vaccines are starting to be trialed around the world. As we all know, an effective vaccine is the cornerstone in the global fight against COVID-19 and essential if we are to learn how to live with the virus in the long term. The Solidarity Fund is proud to be in a position to support government's efforts to accelerate the rollout of vaccines in South Africa with a donation of 327 million rand to secure the country's position in the COVAX program. This particular donation is earmarked for the upfront payment required for South Africa to join the program and represents 15% of the total cost of securing access to vaccines for 10% of the population. That would be roughly 6 million people. The fund was set up as an agile, rapid response vehicle to unite the country in support of the national effort to combat COVID-19. The speedy rollout of a comprehensive vaccine program is vital to end the devastation that COVID-19 has brought on people and the economy. COVAX is a crucial part of this program, and therefore there can be no greater service that the fund can do for the people of South Africa than to play our part in ensuring that we receive our equitable share when the vaccines become available. In the meantime, there is still a lot of work to be done. Thanks to the generosity of donors from individuals, ordinary South Africans who reached into their pockets, to business, to NGOs and international supporters, the fund has been given a clear mandate to use the donations wisely, effectively, and responsibly to help fight the pandemic. When President Ramaphosa launched the Solidarity Fund with 150 million donation from government, the ensuing response from business and individuals was rapid and inspiring. To date, the fund has received 3.1 billion in financial contributions from over 304,000 donors, including 14,487 individuals, 2,523 corporates, and from international donors. Since Gloria touched on the aspect of individuals donating throughout the country, we also received an overwhelming response of in-kind donations and human resource support. An example of an in-kind donation we received, for instance, was when Transnet converted their 2 Pillow Pepper community health trains into testing stations. This kind of support was priceless and was evidence of the greatest leap of faith and hope in a fund that had no previous track record. The fund's work is really defined by 3 pillars: The health response, aimed at supporting urgent aspects of the health system response and supporting and protecting frontline health workers. The humanitarian effort, aimed at providing humanitarian support to the most vulnerable households and communities. The Solidarity Campaign. Under the behavioral change pillar, which is aimed at uniting the nation in action against COVID-19, and critically encouraging behavior change in communities across the country. In terms of the allocation of funds during our first 6 months across the 3 pillars, we roughly targeted the following proportional breakdown. As you can see on the screens, that is the health response was targeted around 70 to 75%, the humanitarian efforts 20 to 25%, the behavioral change in the form of the Solidarity Campaign, 5 to 10%. These are rough indications. They're not necessarily where we landed, but they give directionality as to the effort that was placed. The following allocations and disbursements were made actually during the period. This does get a bit number heavy in this section, but these numbers are all in the report. So under the health response, PPE was the leader by far of all allocations and disbursements, as indicated by the need at the time. The amount allocated was 884 million rand, and the amount dispersed for PPE was 703 million by the end of September. Testing was allocated 409 million rand, with 334 million rand dispersed. Essential equipment was allocated 405 million rand, and really that has largely been dispersed in the second phase. And ventilators, the allocation there was 282 million rand, and the amounts dispersed were 119 million rand. Johnny will be speaking to the health response in a bit more detail, so I'll just keep it to the high level numbers. On the humanitarian effort, in respect of food relief, 320 million rand was allocated, and by the end of September, 117 million was dispersed. Gender-based violence, 92 million allocated and 12 million dispersed by the end of September. Behavioral change, the Solidarity Campaign, 61 million was allocated and 35 million dispersed by the end of September. We will delve into each pillar in a moment with Johnny and Nicola's assistance. We note that many of these programs are ongoing, so what wasn't dispersed by the end of September continues, in fact, to be dispersed now and into the future. At its heart, the Solidarity Fund aims to be a part of and drive a coordinated effort in response to the COVID-19 pandemic in South Africa. A key founding principle is that of additionality, where the fund has contributed towards extra good that would not have been achieved in the absence of its investment, efforts, and coordination. This principle of additionality finds direct expression in the nature and number of partnerships the fund has formed and deepened since its inception. If there is one lesson that seems to apply across all projects and all pillars, it is the importance of meaningful cooperative partnerships. Without them, what has been achieved would have been impossible. A big thank you goes out to all who have assisted us in our first 6 months, and who continue to assist us too, going forward. You are too many to name, unfortunately, but not too many to remember. Thank you very much for your assistance. I would like to make a special mention of our colleague, Wendy Clow, the current head of the humanitarian and behavioral change pillars. Wendy, even though you are unable to join us today due to bereavement, we honor your work. Nicola Galambik, a colleague who has been there from the very inception. I think probably if there were boxes to have been brought in, she would have been bringing them in. Will present on your behalf. Nicola, as Ashraf introduced, holds the position of the head of disbursements and deployments, and generally very hands-on in many respects. And thank you, Nicola, for stepping up to present on the humanitarian and behavioral change pillars. We will now take a closer look at the health pillar. So I will hand back to, do I hand back to you, Ashraf? And then Johnny will take it. You're muted. Ashraf, you're muted. Ashraf?
Yes, you've handed back to me, and that's absolutely fine. Thank you for that, Thandi. I think what's very clear, just without getting into the numbers, I think your level of enthusiasm, your commitment on behalf of the board that you represent, and your commitment to the country in terms of delivering on this course, even in the short period that you've been at, I think is very, very evident. And we pray that this philosophy of stepping up continues, not just from yourself, but for the entire team here, but for all of us on the outside looking in, because we shouldn't be looking in. We need to embrace this and deliver on this to ensure that we as South Africa can meet very, very important targets in terms of our response around COVID-19. So thank you for that, Thandi. Now, as has been mentioned, Jonathan Broomberg will have specific maybe deep dives down into issues around health. He's the executive for the health pillar. And Jonathan, if you can deliver then the health report. So Jonathan Broomberg for 10 minutes on the health report.
Thanks very much, Ashraf, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I think I don't need to remind us all about the appalling tragedy of this global pandemic and its impact on our own country. But we feel in the fund that it's important to recognize at the same time that we have created lasting legacies that we can be proud of. A strong and very powerful collaboration across business and civil society with government, an incredible range of volunteerism that has come together. And in the health space, one of the the key impacts of this legacy is that as of today, and partly as a result of the work of the fund, but also so many other organizations and people, we can see that our health system, both public and private, have coped admirably with the clinical burden of COVID-19. Our hospitals have adequate PPE. The country has sufficient testing capacity, and really our doctors and healthcare workers and hospitals have coped remarkably well. And our fatality rates are very well in line with the best in the world. And this is something as a country we should feel very proud of. It is, as I said, the result of very strong and effective partnerships. And one of those that's been absolutely fundamental for the Solidarity Fund has been a strong partnership with the Department of Health. Each proposal that's ultimately been funded by the fund has resulted from either directly from the department or, for example, from a state-owned entity like the National Health Laboratory Service, or has been in very close collaboration with the department itself. So I think you're aware of, and Thandi has mentioned, the broad categories of what the fund has supported. Again, the details are in the report, which is available to you, but I will attempt to briefly summarize these. A very large initial focus was on testing, clearly critical to allow the country to test, all those suspected of infection and to do contact tracing. The fund allocated 409 million to bolster national testing capacity. As of the end of September, about 335 million had already been dispersed, and the rest of that is being dispersed at the moment. And this had significant impact on the ability of the National Health Laboratory Service to cope with what was a huge surge in demand in the early months, as many of you will recall. Total of 1.2 million kits were purchased by the fund to support the National Health Laboratory Service. We also worked hand in hand with the South African Medical Research Council to stand up virology laboratory capacity at 7 universities and 3 labs in previously disadvantaged universities to further increase testing capacity, as well as supporting a community-focused testing initiative with the Association of Independent Community Pharmacies. So a large number of tests were done. The labs were stood up, and fundamentally, we were able to bridge a gap at a point when that was really critically needed. A second big focus was supporting the delivery of care in the public hospital system, which, as you know, at the time, we were all very concerned about the ability of that system to withstand a big surge. In the end, as I said, it has certainly done that, and it's well positioned to cope with now the second wave that we are all having to deal with. The mechanisms for supporting the public hospital system through the fund were firstly through the procurement of PPE. Thandi already mentioned this was the largest area of our support, approximately 900 million. We worked very closely with the Department of Health in understanding the needs and where the PPE was required. We worked very closely with Business for South Africa, which stood up a very effective procurement operation, which placed all the orders for the PPE. And it was extremely challenging, as I'm sure you're all aware, getting the right stock of the right quality at the right price at a time when every country in the world was chasing the same stocks, mainly in China, was very difficult. I think we feel very satisfied that at the end of the day, the funds deployed from the Solidarity Fund procured the right quality of equipment at good prices. There was no leakage, and the equipment reached the destinations that were required, really at a time when public sector stocks were needing to be built up, and the fund supplies created much needed bridge between the early situation and when public procurement was able to step in. The second area, aside from PPE, was the procurement of essential equipment, including ventilators. The fund has provided support to 3 provinces heavily impacted by the epidemic. That's the Eastern Cape, the Western Cape, and Gauteng. That funding has been used and is being used to procure essential equipment, for example, ICU equipment and other hospital equipment, including ventilators. In terms of ventilators, the fund supported the procurement of 200 very sophisticated so-called invasive ventilators that are used in an ICU setting, which were distributed to hospitals in the public sector. And then the fund supported the National Ventilator Project. This was a very powerful local collaboration under the leadership of the Department of Trade and Industry with other government departments and the CSIR. And in the end, the fund supported the production of 20,000 CPAP ventilators. These were made locally. These are low-tech, non-invasive ventilators used outside an ICU setting. And several thousand of these are already in use in our public hospital system. and will continue to be used both, for the duration of the COVID-19 pandemic, but also later on, they can be deployed for other uses as well. Finally, all of you will have read recently about the vaccine initiatives and the decision of our government to collaborate in the global COVAX facility, and the decision of the fund to support that participation with an initial payment of 327 million, which constitutes the down payment that the country has to make to participate in that facility. So this is due to be paid very shortly. It does mean South Africa will participate. It will secure vaccines for 10% of the population. The allocation will be decided by the government, most likely to healthcare workers and to highly vulnerable segments of the population. So Ashraf, I'm going to hand back to you now. That brings to a close the summary of what was done in the health sector. And obviously we can answer questions if there are such later on. Thank you very much.
Myself, right. Okay, thank you for that, Johnny. Jonathan Broomberg, the Health Pillar Executive, reflecting on this all-important health report. I think even at this point in time, and I'm sure it's going to come up with questions from the media, which is in terms of the overall impact of the Solidarity Fund, you have to ask yourself, what would have happened if there was no Solidarity Fund? Something to think about as we get to Q&A later on. Let me then bring in Nicola Golumbik, who's the Head of Disbursements and Deployment. But as you've heard, Wendy Clow is not around because of a bereavement. In fact, she lost her father. And therefore, on her behalf, in fact, Nicola will deliver the Humanitarian Report and Behavior Change Report. I think it is a report that is as important at this time as the health issues, particularly so in the context of where we are now with regard to the pronouncements by the Minister of Health that we are in a second wave, and a lot of it has got to do with many of us as South Africans just not getting the gravity of behavior change. So Nicola, I'll leave it to you. Thank you.
You're on mute, Nick.
Apologies, I thought that was being handled by Franco. Good morning, everybody, and it's great to be with you here today, and to have the opportunity to share some more detail on the humanitarian and behavior change efforts of the fund in its first 6 months of operation. As Gloria mentioned, I'm going to start with the humanitarian, and as she mentioned, the establishment of the fund corresponded with the implementation of the first and most intensive level 5 lockdown in the country. And it became very evident to the fund that while we were planning to address the health crisis, we had immediate humanitarian crisis that corresponded with that lockdown. And the two areas that we prioritized and continue to prioritize to respond to was that of food insecurity and gender-based violence, both of which significantly escalated during that first level 5 lockdown and have continued to be a very significant fallout of this crisis. In both the cases of food and gender-based violence, the fund recognized that these are systemic and persistent issues in South Africa. And the fund did not mean to try and address them systemically. Our role was to be an agile mechanism to respond to the immediate crisis of the surges in these areas, and to also ensure that our actions were additive and complementary to the incredible efforts that citizens, in fact, stood up to make in these areas. There was a huge mobilization of civil society organizations and of business in responding to food relief efforts at the time, and to providing support in communities for victims of gender-based violence. So our job was to be additive to those. And what we soon recognized was that while there was the surge in civic activity, it tended to be in the metros, and it was unevenly distributed. And the Solidarity Fund has stepped in to both scale up and address the gaps in these food relief efforts, and to support the scale up of the gender-based violence interventions. In the first phase of our food relief program, we went through a very systematic planning process, identifying the poverty wards across the country and working with a network of over 400 organizations to identify the households that were facing the most severe food insecurity crisis, and to be able to provide immediate food relief to those households. We allocated 120 million rand, of which 117 had been dispersed by the end of September, and we have reached 300,000 households as was targeted in that phase of our food relief program. We also, over this period, allocated a further 100 million towards food vouchers, which I'll talk to the food parcel and voucher issues in a moment, as well as to agricultural input vouchers for those subsisting on the land in rural parts of the country. In that first phase, and during the lockdown, I think we need to recall the circumstances in which the food insecurity crisis emerged. The government programs had ceased to operate. The food supply chains were completely disrupted, and food parcel delivery was essential as a means of actually delivering food to households that were in dire distress. We worked with literally hundreds of NGOs, faith-based organizations across the country, as well as with the private sector and with the Department of Social Development, in a very well orchestrated and coordinated effort to manage the food parcel delivery across the entire country, and the most remote parts of and needy parts of the country not being reached by others. We also then piloted a voucher program and have developed, I think, a very successful platform for the distribution of food vouchers to households in distress, and plan to scale that up, and have been subsequent to September implementing programs under the leadership of Wendy Claw to reach households not covered by the social net and not receiving the COVID relief grants. The agricultural input vouchers, as I said, were designed to support on a more sustainable basis the ongoing agricultural production activities of households in the most rural areas of South Africa. So I think a phenomenal effort at a national scale. I think we need to understand that food insecurity challenges remain, but I think that the fund has played a really important role in an immediate and emergency humanitarian effort that was required during the period of the lockdown in respect of food. In respect of gender-based violence, the focus was on scaling up and supporting the existing services available in communities and nationally that were experiencing a surge of demand. And this took the form, firstly, and I think, again, a sector where there are many players, a complex problem, and many different organizations involved in the sector. The Solidarity Fund was able to coordinate and collaborate with many players in the sector to identify the most significant priorities, to identify the 3 projects that we went on to support after a detailed process of consultation and extensive due diligence. And in that phase, we funded a total of 20 million rand, of which 18 has been dispersed, to firstly to the National Shelter Movement, as well as the Thuthuzela Care Centres. The National Shelter Movement is a network of 78 shelters across the 9 provinces. The Thuthuzela Care Centres, led by the NPA, has 55 centres across the 9 provinces. And all of these not only had a surge of demand, but required PPE and medical equipment in order to be able to operate at that front line and support victims at that time. We were able to provide over 300,000 units of PPE to all of those centres across the country and other forms of support. In addition, we were able to scale up the Gender-Based Violence Command Centre with 40 additional workstations and laptops required to be able to cope with the surge in demand that the call centres were receiving. And also scaled up a communication efforts around gender-based violence to mobilize both, and support the prevention efforts as well as community support for victims. So an area of significant partnership and I think very significant impact during this period in a scourge in our country. I'm going to shift then to the behavior change and communication campaign. I think Ashraf and others have indicated that from the very outset of the Solidarity Fund, we recognized that combating the COVID pandemic is as much a function of citizens' own behavior as it is a function of the readiness of the public health system and our health systems to respond. And reducing the rate of transmission and flattening the curve of transmission was the vital in the early weeks of the fund that we turned ourselves to, as was the need to really mobilize the country in what was the equivalent of a war effort and really to both celebrate and to accelerate acts of solidarity and of a feeling of national solidarity that would see us through this crisis as a nation. So the first thing that we did was establish, working closely with other civil society networks, traditional leaders, faith-based organizations, business and government partners, clarity on the priorities for a behavior, the behaviors that were required from citizens, the need for united and social solidarity action, and also were able to establish the Solidarity Fund brand through an initial media and communication effort, which established the purpose of the Solidarity Fund, the importance of social solidarity, and simple messaging related to preferred behaviors associated with reducing the transmission of COVID-19. The Citizens in Solidarity campaign, as it was called, included the support of the cricket, apologies colleagues, I'm just struggling here. The Citizens in Solidarity campaign, I think was an important first step. It was able to really focus on solidarity as the brand itself. We were included in the Solidarity Cup and were able to mobilize celebrities and influencers around the notion of solidarity in those early weeks. But soon pivoted our focus and activity to the behaviors that were needed to change among citizens. And this required working at a much deeper community level, not just through the large-scale media campaign, but also with networks of influencers in community who would have the ability and the ability to influence citizens and their attitudes and behaviors to COVID. Our efforts in this regard included a 26-part radio series, which Sikaba COVID Radio, broadcast as of the 23rd of April on 15 SABC radio stations, reached over 28 million South Africans, was a partnership with several organizations and the SABC, and was an important vehicle for public education, for engaging parents and caregivers, for engaging primary healthcare workers. We were also able through that series to keep gathering feedback from listeners and insights from focus groups that we did and research that we were able to conduct with listeners to the program as well as with the general public. And it gave us a very textured understanding of what people's attitudes were, of what the questions were addressed. And this could then inform the content of our media campaigns and the segmentation of our media and communication efforts. We also had a very exciting partnership through RX Radio. The Red Cross War Memorial Children's Hospital ran a broadcast for young children, and that was an incredible opportunity to engage with younger South Africans and understand the pandemic from their perspective. We were able to partner with business on and with Labour on the Safe Return to Work campaign. And this was a vital campaign to ensure that as the economy opened up and people returned to work, they were able to do so safely, as well as a significant communication effort around safe commuting. As we know, taxis in particular and transport in general were a vector for the transmission of the pandemic at that time. And we were able to partner with many stakeholders to on campaigns to promote safe behaviors around commuting. So I think a very significant effort on a range of fronts. We were able to partner with traditional leaders, providing loud hailers to traditional leaders, communicating in their communities, and support the extensive efforts of all the faith-based organizations who were running large-scale campaigns through their communities at this time. Through this combination of processes and communication platforms and channels, we've been able to reach nearly 80% of adult South Africans through this campaign. And I mean, I think the research that we've done and supported in this time has indicated that these media and communication interventions have reached their target audiences, and I think that have made an important contribution to the behavioral adherence by South Africans that has contributed to assisting with the management of this pandemic. Eddie will talk further to our future plans in this regard when he looks to the coming months. Thank you, and back over to you, Ashraf.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think thanks for that, Nicola. Yeah, so that part about behavior change, I'm sure there's so many questions to be asked about that. If it is working well, there are just so many people who have anecdotes about a sense of complacency, certainly in the last month or two. So, and then in the light of last night's pronouncements, maybe a rethink in terms of how we engage and how we connect. I just want to say one thing because it's personal. Last night after the announcement, Dr. Seth Cooper was on SABC News, I think it is, and he was making the point that it's more important now that people with a public persona come out and say that in fact they've been COVID positive. Now I know when I did, I was one of the first people of maybe 2 or 3 in July who was willing to do just that. And even then, Chrisella Lewis from SABC was saying, Ashraf, you have no idea how many people refuse to be interviewed and share their experience. So perhaps even now, another take on that becomes critically important. But having said that, Adrian, you have lots more to say. Adrian Anthoven is the chairperson of the deputy chairperson of the Solidarity Fund, and he will talk about phase 2 strategic focus and behavior change. This all important media and communications campaign. So over to you, Adrian.
Thanks, Ashraf. So, I mean, I think just before I talk about phase 2, I mean, I think just helpful for everyone to understand that, you know, we've separated at the fund our thinking in terms of the 2 phases of the fund. I mean, the first phase is what we describe as the crisis phase of the fund, which is really everything that has been covered today. And we were really set up as a crisis intervention. I mean, when we started in March, we were going into this crisis. No one really knew what to expect. Our health system was not ready for it. A huge amount of work has happened over the last 6 months and a huge number of interventions on the part of the fund. And that crisis phase is complete. That doesn't mean COVID-19 is over or that the health crisis is over, but this particular crisis phase of the need to ready the country for the COVID-19 pandemic and to respond to the kind of immediate needs that arose in the early stages of the crisis, that phase of this pandemic is over. And we think that there's something that is going to be different, that is going to be called upon for the fund to respond in this next phase, what we call kind of, you know, the living with COVID-19 phase. And I'll talk a little bit about that. I mean, just to preface my input, Ashraf, just to say that, you know, and you'll have heard from all the interventions of my colleagues at the fund. You know, when we started in March, I mean, we had nothing. There was no institution, there were no funds, there was no projects. You know, what we did over that 6 months, I think, you know, is a testimony to what South Africa can do when we come together as a country, where we pull together around a common purpose, where we work and all commit the resources that we have to make a significant difference at scale. And you know, for all of those, you know, who are listening to this, I mean, we who've been involved in the fund, the kind of volunteer army, the board, the team that have been leading this, I mean, we have taken, you know, have felt a sense of kind of enormous responsibility as the custodians of this national initiative, you know, responsibility to our donors, to all those, you know, who have been and are at risk of being infected by COVID-19, all those in the national effort that's been led by the president, and obviously all those who live in South Africa. I mean, this is we're a fund for all of South Africa, you know, representing all of the country and accountable to all of South Africa. You know, what has been possible over the last 6 months has been possible because of what we call the spirit of radical generosity, you know, not only in terms of the contribution of money, but the contribution of time and energy and effort on a pro bono basis by organizations and individuals. So I think that's something to be celebrated. I mean, what was achieved in the 6 months, what has been described here, we're talking about some 40 projects and sub-projects involving over 200 legal agreements, you know, with counterparties. I mean, it's a monumental effort. The board that had standing, and every subcommittee of the board that had standing weekly meetings that met at least every 2 weeks from the middle of March. I mean, just you know, a completely unusual governance, but that was required by the urgency of this crisis. So the question now is, you know, well, that we have been asking ourselves at the fund is, and I think the importance of this moment is for us to account to the nation for what we have done in this first 6 months. And I think it's very unfortunate that often we get confused with other initiatives and you know, some of the issues that have happened in some of the government departments and provinces and so on with procurement. You know, we have operated as an independent fund, I think, have certainly discharged our responsibilities to the best of our ability with the utmost care and urgency. And you know, it is incumbent on us to account to South Africa for what we have done. And really, this is what this is about in the release of this interim report during this crisis phase. And the question for us in the next phase of living with COVID-19 is, you know, what is called upon for the fund? You know, what is needed from us in this next phase? And this has always been a very important question for the fund, that we can't solve every problem. And so we've got to think about how can we have outsized impact with the funds that we have available. Now, coming into the second phase, we had circa 800 million rand available. As you know from what's been shared, we've committed 320 odd million rand. Actually, just to be clear, the amount that we've committed is actually a dollar amount. It's around $19.2 million. So the strengthening of the rand is certainly will help in our favor. But that is the deposit that was required, the 15% deposit to vaccinate 10% of our population. And just to be clear, and the point has been made, from our perspective, we could not think of a more valuable place to allocate capital in a catalytic way than to the acceleration of the rollout of vaccines in this country. We really strongly believe that the only way to end the devastation that's been visited upon families, communities, our economy, and the country from COVID-19 is through a comprehensive rollout of the vaccine and widespread herd immunity from those that have been vaccinated and have been infected. So this is a critically important task for all of us as a country. While this is all underway, obviously, and as Nicholas spoke about, one of the really important, we talk about what is called upon for the fund. One of the things that is really important as a role for us to play is to continue this national campaign to try to drive the behaviors that are needed, the non-pharmaceutical interventions that are often referred to, the behaviors that are needed to keep infections under control, and from the position we're in now, to try to end the second wave that we are experiencing. And the second wave is not going to be ended by government or the Solidarity Fund, or it's going to be ended by citizens in South Africa taking it upon themselves, communities, individuals, organizations, NGOs, faith-based organizations, businesses, stepping up and saying, we're going to manage and contain the infections by making sure that the behaviors that are required to maintain these infections, the rate of infections are observed. And we know these are, avoiding large indoor gatherings, wearing masks, practicing good hygiene, physical distancing. I mean, these are the fundamentally important, behaviors that we need to adopt. So as our next phase, as Nicholas says, although we had a huge effort around communication and behavioral change in phase one, the crisis phase, in the living with COVID-19 phase, again, there's a huge need for the fund, and we're responding to that need to maintain our national effort around communication and behavioral change, to maintain those and drive those kinds of behaviors. And I think we really call upon in this call everyone who is listening to get behind this campaign around behavioral change. We are launching a media campaign across a range of different platforms: TV, radio, digital, billboards, social media activations, influencer marketing, that will commence on the 18th of December and will run as long as it's is needed. But we see this as something that this campaign is as lasting for the duration of the remainder of the fund, while we're in this phase of living with COVID-19 and before we get to the point where we are able to get the virus under control. And then just to say that that obviously during this phase, we need to be continue to be agile and responsive. So we know that that there's much that's going to be called upon of us in relation to the humanitarian crises which continue, and that there will be key catalytic health interventions like the acceleration of the vaccine rollout that has been spoken to on this call, that are going to be really important interventions for the fund to make. But we've got limited resources in the broader scheme of things, and we're going to have to be very targeted and focused to make sure that we can have the greatest impact possible with the funds that we have available, and that we are able to see the country through this this phase of living with COVID-19. And just finally, Ashraf, Gloria mentioned it, and Thandi, but I would like to just also reiterate, from my perspective, just the incredible contribution that's been made by individual South Africans and companies, and not just in terms of funding, but time and energy. I've never experienced people working like people have worked at the fund. It really has, I think, been an incredible embodiment of what we're capable of as a country when we come together, and the commitment that South Africans have shown to combating this crisis, as Nicholas says, not just through the fund. I'm talking specifically here about the contribution to the fund, but in society and communities across the country. I think it's just remarkable the solidarity efforts that we see and we witness every day. And it's just something for us to celebrate and as the leadership of the fund really to express our deep, deep gratitude for. Thank you, Ashraf.
Adrian, I think you're so right about that. Without getting into the details, I know, besides what's publicly known, of the length and breadth of organizations at community, at suburban, at city level, forget even on a national level, outside even of the Solidarity Fund, who have come together in the most incredible ways. And I've always wondered, you know, just how much resources do they have? Because it seems like this well that just doesn't stop delivering water. Thank goodness for that. But yes, people have come out in massive numbers. I mean, I will borrow a phrase from the Champion South African organization that I head up, because I think it's important. We say, you know, champion people build champion nations. And therefore, I think it speaks to exactly what you're saying. The crisis or the crises has the champion nation and hopefully building it up into something more formidable later on down the line. But I think the point is well taken. So what we're going to do now is we're going to ask questions, or rather invite media to ask questions, and it's going to come in one of a couple of ways, okay? First prize is for you to speak to Franco, because I think he's in communication via the chat line with members of the media, and you come up and you ask a question directly via your video, right? And of course with your sound. So then in that case, we will unmute you. If, however, and I understand people are seated in different places, you don't want to be seen, then you can still come on, but ask the questions. We hear the sound, but we won't see you, and that's fine as well. The third prize would be text, okay? And there are members of the media texting already, and then we'll pick that up, and then I'll put it to the CEO first, and then she may then put it on to the relevant person to ask those questions. So register your interest in asking questions. I would say do it like right away, ASAP. What I will do before we get to that is go back to the CEO, Thandi Nzimande, who closing remarks based upon what was said itself. So Thandi, over to you.
Thank you, Ashraf. So the first 9 months of the Solidarity Fund have been challenging, very challenging. And I think we're all aware of the challenges of having to live through this difficult time. Indeed, whilst challenging, also inspiring, in other ways, heartbreaking, and also uplifting. It's been a tumultuous time. We have achieved so much, and yet we know there is so much more that needs to be done by all of us. It gives us all hope, however, when we look at how individuals and businesses have rallied together, making a difference in these challenging times. As we near the start of a new year, which will undoubtedly see COVID-19 continue to have an impact on our daily lives, I appeal to South Africans on an individual basis that we do not succumb to pandemic fatigue. It is natural after such a long time, but now is the time to be ever vigilant. The second wave tells us this. It is the time to increase our efforts so that the hard work that everyone has put in the last 9 months is not diminished. It is indeed a time to be forward moving, not past focused. I feel there have been a lot of thank yous today, but I honestly think I cannot say thank you enough to the team, the volunteers, the donors, all our partners known and indeed unknown in acting against this pandemic, who have gone above and beyond to serve our country in its time of need. And I'd just like to say finally, thank you to everyone who has joined us online, and spent time with us to hear about the impact reports. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ashraf.
Thanks for that, Thandi. Okay, so what I'll do, Franco's going to line up some of the media who wish to ask questions via video or voice, okay? And as soon as I get an okay from Franco, we'll do just that. In the meantime, there's some text questions from the media. So the first one is Lindley Donnelly from Business Day and Financial Mail. Now, I'm going to put it to you, Tanya, and you can decide who needs to answer it, okay? In fact, typically, like most journalists, Lindley asked 3 questions, right? Number 1, how much exactly will the fund be contributing to the COVAX vaccine payments, and when are these due? Should I maybe ask that one question first, and then we'll take it one at a time, because it can become...
That would be helpful. Yes, thanks.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we touched on that. I spoke to the 327 million rand, which is the number that we've been speaking to. And AD just clarified that to be based on a dollar amount, and the dollar amount, which will not be shifting, is $19.2 million that has to be paid over to the COVAX facility. In terms of timing, we're looking probably within the next week.
Okay, so before Christmas, right? Got that. The second one, after the initial payment, will it be making any further payments on behalf of South Africa? So this will be from the Solidarity Fund specifically. If so, can you provide details?
It's hard to say categorically no. We haven't agreed on any further amounts in respect of this particular phase. However, we work in collaboration and we are supportive of government's efforts. So to the extent that there may be an additional need, we would be talking about that. We're working quite closely and supportively of government on this. AD, did you want to add?
I remember at an earlier time, the comment was that in terms of the funds raised so far, or pledged of 3.1 billion, there was no need for furthermore. Is there now for further funding the Solidarity Fund?
I'll pass that over to AD, if I may.
So Ashraf, I mean, just firstly on this question about, whether we're going to be allocating more money to vaccines and the vaccine rollout, and I think there was a point from William on the chat about this being the greatest impact the fund could have. I mean, I think we're certainly in agreement that supporting the vaccine rollout is, of vital importance. And, I think the real question though for us, and I think this is, what I try to convey around the sort of framing questions for the fund is, what particular problems or challenges need us as the fund? Because if there are plans in place and resources available to roll out and execute that don't need us, we don't need to be involved in even things that are really important if other people are going to solve those problems and address them, obviously government in particular. And so the question that we will obviously need to explore is there anything in further, that crops up? And as Thandi says, I mean, we work very closely with the NGOH. And just to the kind of question about, did the government ask or did the fund volunteer and so on? I mean, we have right from the beginning worked very closely with the National Department of Health to understand what the needs are and what role the fund can usefully play, to make sure that we have the outsized impact with the funds that we have available. And so we don't want to be spending money or committing resources if the big government, budgets are already allocated there. So at this stage, we have no further plans that are kind of concrete on the table, but obviously this is a work in progress, and we consider accelerated vaccine rollout as possibly the most important kind of national priority right now. Okay, got that. Then the last question from Lindley is, with the announcement of the second wave, aside from funds for the vaccine, how does the fund envisage its role going forward? That is, where does it see itself operating, assisting in the response? I think something you've sort of already touched on, Adrian, but go ahead. Yeah. Or Thandi first, love. Yeah.
I think AD can continue because he has actually touched on it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's like I mentioned earlier. the big interventions we made in the first phase, we don't think we're going to be called upon to make in the second phase. Things like the big PPE interventions, the big interventions around testing, around the ventilators, even essential medical equipment. The information we have is that there's been a huge amount, one, that's been learnt in the public health system about how to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic and patients who are ill, and also the kind of equipping of the facilities to be able to deal with it. But as I said, and I talked earlier about the need for us to be kind of agile and tactical in this next phase about what is going to be needed of us. I think this is going to be a work in progress, because we may get called upon to make very specific targeted interventions. And obviously, as Thandi said earlier, additionality is really important to us. So we need to feel, if we don't make that intervention and we don't, that impact wouldn't have happened without our intervention. And so that is something that we will still need to discuss as the crisis unfolds. I mean, the things that we know around behavioral change, communication, the vaccine, I mean, these are the things that we know we will be involved in, but whether there will be other health interventions required from us, at this stage, those are unclear.
Okay, and just to get clarity on this, you made the point about being agile. I think that's absolutely understandable. But let's say, reflecting on the past, whereas you operate outside of government, right? You certainly are part of the overall national agenda. How much of these macro decisions are made once decided by the Solidarity Fund, and then first getting approval from government? So you made the point about not wanting to duplicate and not doing things that other people can do. So once you agree on a certain strategy, how much of it has to be passed through to government, or say the Ministry of Health firstly?
So I'm happy to, I was thinking of Johnny, but, there's Johnny. I was thinking of Johnny in the context of the health space and potentially Heather. However, I think a lot of the health space decisions are decisions in support of the strategy that the country is adopting. So it's not so much that we determine a strategy, we determine how to support that strategy in looking at those spaces for additionality and acceleration and that sort of thing, where the presence of the Solidarity Fund makes a significant difference.
Okay, got that. Let's move on. William Horn from Media 24. And I think it looks like most people want to check, so go ahead and do just that. Just text your questions in the Q&A or the chat line, and Frank will pick it up and pass it on to me. And William asks, will the fund be assisting government in paying for more of the vaccines than just the required deposit? I think that's been asked and answered already. Isn't this the greatest impact that the fund could have? Secondly, did government ask the fund to pay the deposit, or did the fund volunteer? Okay, Thandi?
I would say those are the questions we've just answered. In that, as Adi was saying, we work really closely with government. So in particular, the Department of Health. So in streamlining that strategy, we work together. It's not really a case of one approaches the other. It's decisions, certainly some of them made jointly where it makes sense.
So to get clarity, did they ask, or was it sitting around the table and say, we've got some money and we can support it?
We had a discussion about it, and we saw that it made sense to support government.
Okay, got that.
Let me qualify that. Okay, Adi, maybe you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, obviously, Ashraf, if we thought that money was going to just get paid, I mean, we weren't just giving our money up. I mean, this was obviously a significant part of our remaining funds. We felt that this was absolutely a catalytic role for the fund, and that we were required, that the country needed us to participate to help, get South Africa into the COVAX queue. Obviously, the bulk of the funding is going to come from government. They put the guarantees in place and so on. But what came out of those discussions was the clear need for the fund to partner with government to help put the both the facilities and the cash resources in place to secure our position.
I think thanks for clearing that up. Let's move on to representative from the Citizen, and that's Sinikiwe Hlacheneni, who asks, I would like to know what the fund's response is to the AG second report, particularly the adverse observations made about the management of funds, resources, and procurement processes. Sandy?
Thanks. Adi, do you want to respond to that from a sort of governance perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. Yeah, I do. I mean, I mean, Ashraf, I'm really pleased this question's come up. I mean, I'll try to address it in my input, but it's been one of the really unfortunate things that has happened to the fund is that we have got confused in the minds of many people with other efforts, in particular on the part of provincial governments and others, to respond to the crisis. And so often reference is made to solidarity funds, but it's not the solidarity fund. It's funds that government has mobilized for PPE procurement and other things. And the reference here to the AG's report, I mean, has nothing to do with us as the solidarity fund. It's one of these really unfortunate confusions that's happened. I mean, we've been run entirely independently as an organization. Our PPE procurement we partnered with Business for South Africa, a volunteer private sector, a group of individuals, specialists in health, in procurement, supply chain, logistics, and they managed all the procurement for us. And I'm happy to say that there were no issues at all in our, I mean, there were, challenges and all the things that Johnny spoke about, but no issues around mismanagement or misappropriation of funds and so on. So, we absolutely are completely separate and independent from the issues that have been raised in the AG's report. So I think it's very important for everyone on this call to understand that the fund is an independent entity and had nothing to do with all of the kind of issues around PPE procurement that we've seen. Our PPE procurement and all the procurement that we did was run completely independently. Obviously, we'll have an independent audit that'll be produced at the end of February at our year end that'll show this. But very important to clarify that this had no relationship to the fund.
Okay, and so having said that, there are certainly members of the media who now get that, but the public may not get that. Besides people watching on live television now and following it up on YouTube, would there be an effort there for AD to clarify that even further, to ensure that message is amplified, to say we as a Solidarity Fund are absolutely clear with the funds we've received and how we've disbursed, we not to be confused with anybody else. So is there a need for that, to amplify that further? And then would that be part of an ongoing communication strategy from your side?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really important, that we do clarify this, because I think it's very unfortunate that people sit with or some people, with a perception of the fund, because we've been confused with some of the issues that were raised in the AG report. Very important that we clarify that the fund has been completely independent of all of those things. There have been no issues related to the fund's procurement processes, and so very important. And also, I think to stress that we have taken governance incredibly seriously. I mean, our governance processes at the fund, I think, are exemplary. I mean, the way in which the board, the subcommittees of the board, the processes, the delegations of authority, I mean, these are, really very sophisticated governance systems that we put in place to make sure that precisely these kinds of things don't happen at the fund.
Okay, got that. So let me remind you again, further questions, and we're probably going to wrap up, I think, maximum at 1:45, Franco, with your permission. That's another 15 minutes beyond what we had planned. And there are more questions, but if you have any questions around impact and your observations and following up questions on that, please do so. So Hilary Jaffe from the Business Times asks, are you aware of similar initiatives that were established in other countries in response to the COVID crisis? I think an important question, perhaps, if you are, and maybe my follow-up is, so what has been their experience as well? Sandy, go ahead.
Thank you, Ashraf. Martin, would you mind responding to that one? Martin?
Now, let me respond. Yeah, no, let me respond to that, Tan, if I may.
Thank
Okay,
you.
go ahead, Martin. Martin, perhaps just
Thank
help
you.
us introducing yourself as well, so we know. I think I know, but I think others may need
Yes,
to know.
I'm Martin Kingston. I'm Martin Kingston from Business for South Africa and an advisor to the board and the executive of the fund. I think Hillary's question is an absolutely critical one. We're not actually aware of any similar initiatives that were established of this nature across civil society involving government, business, and indeed civil society more broadly. But as many of the speakers have said, accountable to the nation at large, completely independent with appropriate, transparent both governance and reporting, accountable for both the income that it has received as well as all of the expenditure that it has dispersed, and working as closely as it did with its partners, particularly in government, as Adi has said, really providing a catalytic impact to ensure that when we could move with agility and speed, we could do so before the larger machinery that was available to the nation at large could get moving. Similarly, we've seen in the context of the Solidarity campaign, the behavior change campaign, a degree of leadership, not just in its own right, but on behalf of the social partners more broadly, labor, organized labor, business, and community. And about very impactfully, I think, in the coming days and weeks. So harnessing that energy and patriotism in the spirit of solidarity has been key. And we haven't been aware of any such initiatives that have worked across the spectrum of partnership, as I said, leveraging resources on a pro bono basis, ensuring that we could ensuring that actually the contributions were both appropriate, focused, and could leverage, as I said, broader efforts on behalf of the country at large. We'd like to think actually that it could serve as a model elsewhere for replication in due course. Thanks, Ashraf.
Thanks for that, Martin. Okay, maybe time for two more questions that we're going to wrap up. Lindley has asked a question again from Business Day. To a degree, it's sort of partially asked by me, Lindley, but I'll just clarify it, saying so that the fund is 800 million rands available at this point in time, with a 327 million to be used for the COVAX effort. That leaves about 470 million available for future or second phase work. So is that how much you have left? And with around now 800 million or minus the 327 available, will the fund be considering any further money raising efforts? And how will you raise any further money if required? Or do you think we have enough for now?
Yours is 939499.
Sandy, go ahead. Yeah.
Nicola,
Nicola, okay, go ahead, Sandy.
Right.
Thanks,
I thought that's a dial-in number for the fund, by the way, 93499. But okay, I think it's not the case. Go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you, Ashraf. So we are not at this stage contemplating further fundraising. We are looking at what is the best way of, as we have done all along, of deploying that the remaining amounts. And really, we've been a responsive user of funds, if you will. So, as for instance, I think Adi has already said, when we see hotspots across the country, we look to see what are the possibilities, what roles can we play, and then we respond accordingly. So it is more likely to be in that space, and possibly even in the space of supporting the vaccines and the rollout thereof, but no further fundraising is contemplated at this stage.
Okay, but that could change in January.
That could change. It could change.
William Horn from Media24 asks this important question. To help settle misconceptions, could you help set the minds of our readers, I could say viewers and listeners as well, at ease, and tell us outright that no single cent has been stolen from the fund, in this case, the Solidarity Fund, right? I know this is a strange question, says William, being able to say outright will really help us communicate the fund's message to the people. All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Nicola, are you available to take that one?
If you are, just unmute yourself, Nicola. Yeah. Nicola,
Okay,
there?
it appears that Nicola is not available. So, hey, AD, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Thandi. I mean, you know, I just feel so passionately about this because, you know, we've had 200 people volunteering their time, efforts, energy, working 14, 16-hour days to make sure that not a single cent in the fund is misappropriated. And not only that, but that the funds are directed to have the highest and the most significant impact that we can have. And so I'm absolutely happy to categorically say, Ashraf, that there has been no money misappropriated at the fund, no money stolen, and that the issues that have been experienced in relation to what are often referred to as the kind of COVID-19 funds do not relate to the Solidarity Fund at all. So I can absolutely give that assurance. And all of us who are involved, I mean, the painstaking details. In fact, in some ways, I think one of our frustrations is that we're often delayed in having the impact that we want to have because there's such diligence that goes into, the counterparties, the legal agreements, trying to make sure that there's no risk at all in the way that we're applying, donor funds here. And so, I mean, it is absolutely the case, and we fully expect that the audit that we have at the end of February is going to 100% kind of confirm that. But all of us who are involved in the fund, are very proud of the fact that there are no investigations about anything, any of the expenditure or the way in which the fund has chosen to allocate its funds or the parties that it has been procuring from. So, very happy to confirm that for William.
Okay, let's just get a bit of has been misappropriated from the Solidarity Fund. I mean, we get that, right? Having said that, and you've touched on the words, painstaking and double check. But we sadly live in a country where corruption has become endemic, and it's a initiative across the board, right? Maybe just tell us a bit more, Adrian, about, in terms of your checks and balances, then why when so many other organs of state, SOEs, municipalities have got it completely wrong? That means, what is you apart so that you can be as confident, as emphatic as you are right now?
So Ashraf, I mean, I think it's really the way that we've structured. I mean, I can't speak of other institutions, that have been involved. I can just speak, for the fund. But the way that we've structured our governance systems, the delegations of authority, the multiple checks and balances that are in place from, the fund administration that's done by Old Mutual, the back office infrastructure that was provided by EY, our internal auditors, our external auditors, the independent board subcommittees that applied their minds, that had to approve things that came from the executives, the checks and balances around how disbursements were made, the checks and balances around every counterparty that we entered agreements, not just checks and balances, but the legal agreements that were entered into with every counterparty around the execution of every project and mandate. I mean, these were extremely thorough processes. Now, that's not to say that you can't make a mistake in a process like that, but what I can give assurance of is that there was enormous diligence that was applied. We recognize that one major misstep on the part of the fund, which wouldn't have been a deliberate misstep, but it would have been an error of judgment or something, could have had a devastating impact for the fund. And so the diligence we applied was just so clear and rigorous to make sure that didn't happen. And as I said, that in many cases that delayed the time that it took for us to translate a quick decision to do something. Like, I think a good example was procuring medical equipment, essential medical equipment, where we said this is something that's urgently needed, but because of the diligence and the processes that we needed to go through to satisfy ourselves about who the counterparties were who were providing the equipment, what the nature of the equipment was, what it was going to be used for, and that it was going to, we could check all of those boxes. It delayed it until after the first initial crisis. I mean, we're now providing, fortunately, essential medical equipment into the Eastern Cape at a critical moment of crisis there. But I mean, just to give you a sense of, how important this has been for us. And so, I mean, and this is partly why I think it's been, frustrating for us. And obviously we understand that we operate in a low trust environment in South Africa. And so we need to acknowledge that. And so that's why kind of full transparency has been really important to us, is that the best way to do this is, we have, I think, 10 or 12 reports on our website. Every single one of our projects and initiatives is going to have a comprehensive report, who we contracted with, how much they were paid, exactly where all the money went to, so that everyone can see, this is where all the money came from, and this is where it was all spent, and here's the impact that we think we had.
Well, I'm glad that's a good example of to live up to the mantra of unity in action. And perhaps that would be, hopefully the issue of COVID-19 will leave us soon. But if we can step up on this legacy, the legacy of accountability for every single cent procured and then dispersed, that would be probably one of the great legacies of our country, certainly emerging from this. Right? Just to tell you, we have no further questions from the media, but let me just remind members of the media watching right now, if you, and I have a sense you may well have follow-up questions, the message from management and communications is please bring those questions forward, even if it's not in the context of this webinar. So contact the relevant parties. Questions are welcome, and as AD has emphasized, I think he's used the word transparent like 4 or 5 times today, and probably 10 times in the briefing before today's session. So I think it's absolutely clear the need to do the right thing and to ensure that people know exactly that you are, or the Solidarity Fund is doing the right thing. So further questions, please bring it up. I'm going to wrap up maybe just by asking anybody of the panelists, that's Nicola, Adrian, as well as Thandi, and whoever else may still be around. I know the chairperson's gone. If there's any final comments you wish to make, say maybe one line each. Nicola, if you have to, or Adi, and then we leave it to Thandi just for the final comment. Yeah.
I will just say it's a repetition of saying thank you to our partners who have partnered with us in such a way that we can categorically make the kind of statements that AD is saying, so that we have in fact dealt with the money very well, and very much in reliance on those partners. And for everybody who has made all of this possible, again, just to say thank you very much. Thank you very much for all the sacrifices that you have made to people here and to South Africans at large.
Thank you. AD, you want to add to that at all?
No, nothing to add, Ashraf. I mean, just to just to say, for all of us who've been involved, this is, we're all just, this is national duty for all of us, and as Thandi said earlier, inspiring to see our South Africans across the board, communities, organizations across the country have stepped up. And I think, what's been done in the Solidarity Fund, with all South Africans, and the contribution of all South Africans is something I think for all of us to be proud about.
Okay, and that's where we can leave it. Nicola, I don't think you want to say anything, right?
No, that's fine. I'm happy to leave it there. Thank you, Ashraf.
All right, perfect. Okay, then it's just time for me to say goodbye. So let me just thank everybody who's put this all together, this entire setup today, point one, to all those panelists, delegates, members of the media who's also been a part of it. Thank you to you as well. And to the Solidarity Fund, I think for amplifying once again this need of delivering on behalf of the people, and delivering well, and delivering to a level that we can say this is world class. So there's lots to think about, and the point made by Martin, that unaware, not certain, but unaware that other countries have followed this formula. Maybe there's a template that we need to be proud of here, and that needs further amplification. So from my side, I'll say, let me leave it at that, excepting I will amplify that last point. We said very early on, well, I said it in fact, that not every one of us will be COVID infected, but for goodness sake, every one of us are COVID affected. And therefore, the challenge and the drive for all of us is this, and it comes from my heart because it's something I feel strongly about. Champion people build champion nations. And the call, therefore, to each one of us right now, are we among South Africa's champion people? And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashraf.
Thank you, Ashraf.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. All right, and goodbye.
Thank you.